Hi there, welcome to B40X. I'm Pastor John Albison, and I'm going to be hosting you for this time. For the last couple of weeks, we've looked at how being a follower of Jesus means that we're part of a spiritual family. And just like when we join our physical family, we're born into it, we're born into our spiritual family as well. In our physical family, we start off as babies. People need to feed us. Eventually we grow into young men where we learn to feed ourselves. And eventually we turn into fathers when we learn to feed others. Same too with our spiritual lives. We start off as spiritual babies when we're born into the family of God. And people need to feed us. But the time comes when we become spiritually young men, or young women if the case may be, which we've learned to feed ourselves. Now I remember when I was a young man, and that was a pretty exciting time for me. And young men are strong, young men are fast, young men are self-feeding, and all those are good things. The independence that comes with that stage of life sometimes has some drawbacks. While it's good that we have the ability for independence, it's not necessarily the best thing. Apostle Paul, a number of times in the Bible, uses a metaphor to describe the church, and he talks about the church like it's an army. Not an army that fights humans, but one who fights spiritual battles. And when he talks about us as being an army, there's some important things that he brings out and that are implied in what he says. You see, the Roman army, the Roman generals themselves, attributed the success of their military, in fact, the whole basis of their entire army, the entire empire, on one thing, and that was the ability of their soldiers to keep rank. The whole military war machine and all their tactics were designed to make the enemy break their ranks while the Romans held theirs. All their formations, the way they used their shields, the way they used their swords, were all about getting somebody to break rank. Because as soon as another army broke rank and didn't fight together as a single unit, that army would fall apart. Well, the church isn't all that different. Yeah, you know what? You might be very strong on your own, but you're always going to be much stronger when you're with someone else, when you're bound together. Think about it by looking at my own hand. I think I could poke somebody pretty hard with my finger. You know, it doesn't matter which finger. Maybe my pinky wouldn't poke very hard, but I can poke somebody. If I was under attack and my way of defense was to start poking people, though, maybe it wouldn't be most effective. But as good as my fingers are at poking people in self-defense, if I use them together, that becomes much, much more effective. And in the same way, the church works that way as well. Another metaphor that Apostle Paul uses is that he describes this as being a body, like a physical body. He talks about the church being the body of Christ. Let me show you. Reading in his letter to the church in Corinth, Paul writes and he says this: the human body has many parts, but the many parts make up just one body. So it's too with the body of Christ. Some of us are Jews, some are Gentiles, some are slaves, some are free, but we all been baptized into one body by one Spirit, and we all share the same Spirit. Yes, the body has many different parts, not just one part. If the foot says, I'm not part of the body because I'm not a hand, that doesn't make it any less part of the body. And if the ear says, I'm not part of the body because I'm not an eye, would that make it any less part of the body? If the whole body were an eye, how would you hear? If the whole body were an ear, how would you smell anything? But our bodies have many parts, and God has put each part just where He wants it. How strange a body would be if it only had one part. Yeah, there are many parts, but there's only one body. The eye can never say to the hand, I don't need you. And the head can't say to the feet, I don't need you. Okay. If we as followers of Christ are supposed to be like a physical body, it brings up some interesting questions. First, how closely connected is your hand to your arm? What would happen to your hand if you cut it off from your body? What happens to us if we cut ourselves off from other followers of Christ? And how can we all be one body if we're all so different from one another? Discuss this there with your group. Hope you all got something interesting out of that. The next passage I want to look at, also from the Apostle Paul, but this time written to the Christians in the city of Ephesus. And he writes about the same topic. He says, "Now these are the gifts that Christ gave to his church, the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, and the pastors and teachers. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do his work and build up the church, the body of Christ. This will continue until we all come to such unity in our faith and knowledge of God's Son that we'll be mature in the Lord, measuring up to the full and complete standard of Christ. Then we'll no longer be immature like children. We won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. We won't be influenced when people try to trick us with lies so clever they sound like the truth. Instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of his body, the church. He makes the whole body fit together perfectly. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts grow, so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love." Okay, let's look at this a little bit more closely. What exactly does it say it's going to happen when we all experience this unity in our faith? How is it that unity with other followers of Jesus bring us to spiritual maturity? What happens when we each do our own special work? And lastly, what does this look like today? What does this look like in your life? Discuss this there in your group. The third passage we're going to look at comes from Acts chapter 2. Now, the story is the church has just been born, and we see in one day 3,000 people being added to the church. And right after this story, Luke, the author of the book of Acts, gives us a little paragraph where he describes the secret sauce of the early church. What was it that they did that made them so effective and so powerful and led to this explosive growth and radical transformation of people's lives? He writes this: "They spent their time learning from the apostles, and they were like family to each other. They also broke bread and prayed together. Everyone was amazed by the many miracles and wonders that the apostles worked, and the Lord's followers often met together and they shared everything they had. They would sell their property and possessions to give the money to whoever needed it. Day after day, they met together in the temple. They broke bread in different homes and shared their food happily and freely while praising God. Everyone liked them, and each day the Lord added to their group of others who were being saved." Okay, let's take a look at their example here. The early church frequently met each other in two different locations. Might it be important for us to do this today? Would all the things the early church did be possible if they only met weekly in a large gathering of 3,000? What do you think the benefits are of meeting in both large groups and small groups like the early church did? And lastly, how could this look today? Discuss it there in your group. I hope you all enjoyed that discussion. And in closing, just wanted to say, the picture that we're given of how we're supposed to relate to each other, we're given a number of them in the Bible. That we're to be an army together. That is, we work as a unit. We work in unity and harmony, and we support each other and we protect each other. We're like a family. We're supposed to love each other. We're supposed to bond with each other. We're supposed to grow and mature together. And we're like a physical body. We're actually supposed to be connected one another, supporting each other, making each other healthy. I hope this made a lot of sense, and I hope that you've got a decent action plan for your own life. See you next week.